Today we're going to make a concrete coffee table that has a built-in ethanol fireplace. I'm going to make the form for the coffee table out of melamine. I'm going to cut it into 5-inch strips because that's about how thick I want the coffee table to be. The form consists of two frames, an outer one that defines the edges of the coffee table and an inner one that creates the insert hole for the fireplace burner. I wanted my cuts to be very straight and square, so I used a table saw and a compound miter saw instead of my normal circular saw. I screwed some wood blocks onto the sides of the melamine boards that I'm going to use as a frame. These are just to hold it stable, not really to connect the frame. I'm going to use a hot glue gun to glue up the whole mold. I'm not using a lot of wood blocking to hold this mold together, so it's really important that I glue the corners together very tightly. I glued the pieces for the inner fireplace frame together using a hot glue gun. Then I glued this inner frame to the floor of the formwork. I want to reduce the weight of the table and also create a strong structural base that I can screw the casters to. So I'm going to take 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood, cut holes out of them, and then glue and screw them together. I used a generous layer of Gorilla construction adhesive to glue the 2 layers together, but I accidentally put the wrong side of the plywood down, so I had to flip it over and I made a big mess. I then used 1 1/4 inch deck screws to screw the 2 layers together. I used silicone caulk to seal up the mold. In addition to sealing all the corners and cracks, it's important to also seal the end grain of the melamine boards for the inner frame. I don't want the plywood to absorb water out of the wet concrete, so I put 2 layers of polyacrylic around the plywood base. I screwed 3-inch deck screws halfway into the plywood base. These are going to create metal prongs that help the plywood stick to the concrete. I want a nice dark gray concrete for the table, so I'm going to use 3 bags of Quikrete 5000 along with 2 bottles of Quikrete charcoal pigment. I add the pigment to the water before mixing the water in with the concrete. I mixed and poured the first 2 bags of concrete and then used my hoe to sort of push the concrete down into all the corners. You'll want to use the same ratio of pigment to water for the 3rd bag of concrete so that that layer of concrete doesn't come out a different color. I then placed the plywood frame down onto the wet concrete and filled in around the edges. I left about 2 to 2.5 inches of space around the edges so that there'll be a nice thick concrete lip. I used 2 strips of pine and a hot glue gun to keep the plywood from floating or moving. Let the concrete cure at least 20 hours, but it doesn't hurt to be on the safe side and let it cure a little bit longer. I cut and scraped away all the hot glue from the mold, and then unscrewed the wood blocks and pried off the frame pieces. The inner frame was wedged in pretty tight, so I drilled a whole bunch of holes into the particle board in between the layers of melamine, and then was able to pry it out. I bought these large steel 8-inch diameter casters online, and I just screwed them right to the plywood deck. It's a pretty heavy piece of furniture, weighing about 240 pounds. I bought the ethanol fireplace insert from a company called Flame. They don't sponsor me, but I just found them online and their product seemed pretty cool. These fireplace burners are meant to be used inside or out with ethanol fuel, and they burn really clean. Now, of course, you would want to use this in a very well ventilated area. The burner inserts come in a variety of different sizes and price points. I like this one because it had this stainless steel lid that you could just slide across to extinguish the flame. I'm going to use this piece as an outdoor coffee table, and I love the idea that a group of friends could sit around it, put your feet up on it, and stay nice and warm. For more detailed instructions and links to all the products that I use, be sure to check out my website, homemade-modern.com. And if you want to learn about different concrete products as well as see other DIY projects, check out Quikrete.com. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already.